Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Parthaya Pratibodhitam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Gratitam Purana Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitamritavarshinim Bhagavatim Ashtadashadhyayinim Ambatva Manusandadami Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshinim Namostu te Vyasa Vishala Buddhe Pullaravinda Yatapatra Netra Yena Tvaya Bharata Taila Purnaha Prajwalito Jnanamaya Pradipaha Prapanna Parijataya Totra Vetraikapanai Jnana Mudraya Krishnaya Gita Amrita Duhe Namaha Sarvopanishado Gavo Dogdha Gopala Nandanaha Partho Vatsa Sudhir Bhokta Dugdham Gita Amritam Mahata Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsachanura Mardhanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum. Om Amriteshwarya Namaha. Thank you for joining us again for the Bhagavad Gita class. I think most of you know that we finished chapter 14 last time. And now, tonight, will be an introduction to chapter 15. And we will just give an introduction. So actually, tonight's class will be a little shorter than the usual. And we will also answer some questions that have come over the past week. So, going straight ahead, I would like to begin by sharing Jnanadev's introduction to chapter 15, which is always beautiful to hear his words. And especially in this case, he paints a beautiful picture of his devotion to his guru and the uniqueness of the guru-disciple relationship. This is how it goes. Now, cleansing the heart, may the Guru's feet be installed in it. With partially blossomed flowers in the form of the sense organs, may the flower offerings be dedicated at the Guru's feet. May the Guru's body be adorned with fragrant sandal paste in the form of a single pointed desire to render service, cleansed with water in the form of deep devotion. May the Guru's tender feet be adorned with jingling anklets prepared of gold in the form of unalloyed love. May the Guru's toes be adorned with rings in the form of deep and unswerving devotion. Upon the Guru's feet, may there be placed fully blossomed lotuses having 8 petals, constituting the 8 righteous feelings, laden with fragrance in the form of righteous joy. Before I continue that, I want to share with you that I'm not positive about what those 8 righteous feelings are actually. It was very hard to find an explanation of that, even for me. But it has been suggested that it might be a reference to the 8 flowers dearest to Lord Vishnu. And those are 1, ahimsa, which is non-violence. Number 2, indriya nigraha, which means control of the senses. 3, sarva bhuta daya, so it means showing compassion to all living beings. Number 4, kshama, or we could say forbearance, or also patience, depending on the context. 5 is jnanam, or knowledge, but not any old knowledge. It means spiritual wisdom. And 6 is tapas, or we could call it austerity. 7 is dhyanam, and many of you know that means meditation. And number 8 is satyam, or truth. So it is a perfect fit, whether it's the actual intended meaning or not, and we can just imagine Amma reveling in the sweet fragrance of such flowers. Now coming back to Jnanadev's introduction. Before him, meaning the Guru, may there be burning incense in the form of conceit. Now why is that? It's because we're burning the incense, we're burning the conceit, and Amma has said that we should also offer ourselves like incense sticks. So as our ego burns down, it should release some kind of fragrance that is good for the world. So it's the same kind of metaphor. Continuing, may there be waved around him a lighted lamp in the form of the notion, I am myself, the supreme Brahman. May the Guru's feet be closely embraced with the feelings of complete oneness. May the Guru's feet wear wooden sandals in the form of my body and life, and let enjoyment and liberation be waved around them. When the sun rises in the east, it gives an empire of light to the entire world. In that way, may the faculty of speech be able to make a gift of Diwali festival in the form of knowledge to the entire society. That the speech of the disciple is invested with such infinite beauty is due to the grace of the lotus pollen in the form of the dust of the Guru's feet. What more need be say? The Guru's love is not securable anywhere else but in the mother, declared Jnanadev. He said further, I am only an infant, while the Guru is the mother with an only child, the result being that the flow of her affection turns solely towards me. The Guru has showered his kindness on me in the way the cloud pours down all its water for the sake of the Chataka bird. The Chataka bird is a sort of a mythical bird, you could say, even though there is a bird that in India that matches that description. The part that is mythological to some degree is that it is said that the Chataka bird only drinks rainwater. So he or she is constantly yearning for the rain to fall. So that's why he's saying the cloud pours down all its water for the sake of the Chataka bird, because that's the only thing it drinks. So if the Guru is the only thing that we drink, then the Guru is going to shower her compassion and blessings on us. Continuing, in that way, when the blessed Guru calls one his own, then even worldly existence leads to liberation. Did Lord Krishna, the incarnation of Narayana, ever allow the Pandavas to be in need of anything? No. In that way, Sri Nivrittinath brought up and exalted my ignorance to the same level of knowledge. Sri Nivrittinath is Jnanadev's guru, but actually his elder brother as well. You would really be touched by the story of his life. There's an old black and white movie from India, and if you can get your hands on that, I highly recommend you watch that and see both the worldly sorrow of that life and also the spiritual triumph and bliss. Those two put together is extremely profound for us to witness. Who possesses knowledge to adequately extol the greatness of the Guru? Now, through his grace, I am dedicating at the feet of you, saints, the interpretation of the Gita. So beautiful. And before we look at an overview of chapter 15, I feel it's probably best that we refresh our own memories of the context in which this chapter comes. So far, if you've been watching from the beginning or if you've caught up from the beginning, we have covered almost 80% of the verses of the Gita. So that means about 550 verses, and I know it's got to be more than 150 classes, which leaves us with about 150 more verses to go. And with COVID confining us to one place most of the time, we have covered almost 160 verses over the past 7 months since I came back and resumed the classes. Depending on how COVID goes, we might just finish the entire Gita in another 7 months or so. Each of the Bhagavad Gita's 3 sections covers 3 topics. Just, you may remember, but I'm just reminding everybody because many of you may not remember, or you may be just starting fresh now. The main teaching or philosophical focus is one of those topics. The next is the application of that philosophical focus and a key factor to keep in mind while doing so. So the 3 topics in the first 6 chapters are, there's 18 chapters, so 3 sections of 6 chapters each. The topics in the first 6 chapters are the main teaching on what is called Jiva Swarupam, which means the essence of the individual, the application of that teaching through Karma Yoga, and the importance of self-effort in Karma Yoga. Obviously, Karma Yoga being the path of action, converting that action into a spiritual practice is going to require a lot of self-effort. So that was the additional point that was included there. In the second 6 chapters, the 3 topics are the main teaching on Ishvara Swarupam, or the essence of God. We may think of God as the statue or the idol on the altar or somewhere in the sky. Amma obviously says that that's not correct. It's not the correct way of viewing God, although it may help us to live a spiritual life, a religious life. Really, God is much more and beyond that. So we learned that in those middle 6 chapters. And the application of that teaching through what is called upasana, or more well known as bhakti yoga. Upasana is just a little bit broader definition of bhakti yoga, really. And the third point was the importance of God's grace and Guru's grace in that process. Actually, those of us who have a living Guru would probably agree, all of us would probably agree that more than God's grace, we need the Guru's grace, because the Guru is there in physical form before us, and we can invoke that grace by serving and learning directly from them. But we are now, starting the 15th chapter, we are in the 3rd section of the Bhagavad Gita. So what are the 3 topics here? The main teaching on Jiva Ishvara Aikyam. That means the oneness of the individual and God. Because if you talk about the individual essence and the essence of God, and then you say that they're separate, then we're not a non-dual philosophy here, right? We're preaching and teaching duality. But we already know that Bhagavad Gita is not a dualistic text. It's very much rooted in Advaita or non-dualism. So, after describing the essence of the individual and God separately, the only possible conclusion is that those two are actually one and the same. And that is what we're finding out in this final section. It was the only conclusion that we could have expected. And the application of that teaching is definitely going to be through Jnana Yoga, or the path of knowledge. And as I said before, it's not bookish knowledge, it's not worldly knowledge, it is spiritual knowledge, and it must be subjective. It cannot be objective like some intellectual hobby. And the third point was the importance of cultivating divine virtues in that process. The reason being that if we really want to inculcate, or if we want to cultivate a deeper understanding of these knowledge teachings, then we need to have a lot of spiritual virtues in us, and especially to retain it. Intellectually, we can grasp it sometimes, but if we feel like we're not able to retain those, If we want to increase our retention, we need to cultivate more divine virtues, which are mentioned in great detail in chapter 13, before and after, and more will be coming in the further chapters of the Bhagavad Gita. So, because this is a very deep topic that we're learning in the third and final section of the Bhagavad Gita, we're finding a lot more non-dualistic teachings, much more like the Upanishads rather than Puranas or some other, story-based texts and scriptures that exist. So it's challenging for us to stay focused and absorb that teaching, but it's the only way. So we cannot just skip that last section of the Gita. That would be a travesty. And all the preparation that Krishna made a lot of effort to teach, it wouldn't reach its consummation. So that's where we're trying to get to. Now regarding the main teaching of this section, which I said was Jiva Ishvara Aikyam, the oneness of the individual and God, we need to look at that from two perspectives in order to understand, how it's going to pan out. Those two perspectives are that of, we can call it sopadika, which means with attributes, or we can also call it saguna, and the other one is obviously the opposite, nirupadika, nirguna, or without attributes. So, if I try to compare myself with God as an individual with attributes, I can say I'm 6'1", I look like this, I was born here, I'm this age, and I know this much, and most things in the world I don't know anything about. How can I possibly compare myself with God? How can I say that I'm one with God? It's preposterous. God is, like Amma says, this whole world is God's body. And, of course, God goes beyond that. But there's no comparison at all. God is all-knowing, I have very little knowledge, and so on. We are polar opposites, basically. So that just is not going to work. So, but then if we mentally relinquish all these qualities that I project on myself, this is my name, this is how old I am, I look like this, I was born here, these are my parents, etc. If we reject all those things mentally and say, look, I've done this millions and millions of times. I've been born and reborn. This body and this birth really is just a drop in the bucket. There must be something else that is keeping, this process of human evolution going across millions of births. What is that? We can call it the Jivatma, but the Jivatma also changes. Maybe last birth I had certain attachments that I managed to reduce in that birth. This birth maybe a tiny bit different, a little bit less vasanas than last time, I hope. That means that my subtle body has changed. So when we look at it that way, even the mind, even the intellect, I've learned new things this lifetime that I didn't learn last time, right? So my intellect is, garnering more knowledge. So the subtle body changes, the physical body changes. What is continuous? What is the same? It's only the pure consciousness. And that is the point. If we look at ourselves as that nirguna or attribute-less pure consciousness, that is the only way that we can say that we're one with God. A lot of people in the modern day like to quote the scriptures and say things like that. Oh, I'm one with God, I'm Brahmasmi, I am Brahman. But these are people who are very much attached to their identity as the body. And Amma says if you want to verify, you just poke them with a little needle, and then you'll hear some very dirty mantras chanted at you out of anger. And that, Amma says that's proof that these people are very attached to their body, even though they can repeat the lines of the scriptures. So, if we mentally remove all those attributes, we can maybe understand or say that we can possibly be one with God, if that becomes a permanent experience. That is the only way in which we can say we are one with God. So it is said that the essence of the Bhagavad Gita is a great dictum from the Upanishads, which goes Tat Tvam Asi. I've said this several times before, but I'm saying it again just because it's been a long time since we talked about it. So Tat Tvam Asi is the Sanskrit version of that English rendition, which is thou art that, or you are that you are, etc. So it means that the Guru is saying to the disciple, thou, which is tat, is tvam, and are, asi, tat. That is the supreme absolute. So English words, the order is different, but the point is that you only need 3 words to convey that truth. In Vedantic terminology, we can say that reflecting on the essence of the individual is, tat is a tvam padavichara. Tvam padavichara. It means contemplation on the meaning of the word tvam. That's the Guru saying you. So that's when the disciple's listening, it becomes me. And reflection on the essence of God is tat padam vichara. Contemplation on the word tat, the supreme absolute. And the only thing that can possibly be left when we put those 2 words together is or are, because they're supposed to be the same. So when we reflect on the union of the 2, we call it asi pada vichara, or contemplation of the word asi, tat tvam asi. So the first 6 chapters of the Gita are about tvam, or you, in other words, the individual. Second is tat padam, which is about the essence of God. And the last part is asi padam, or the unity of the 2. These 3 words basically encapsulate the whole teaching of the Bhagavad Gita and the Upanishads. The hard part is experiencing it. Anybody can say those words. So what about chapter 15? So this chapter could perhaps be considered to be the last chapter of the Gita where deep Vedanta is discussed. Later chapters concentrate more on values, preparations, and sadhanas, which we really need badly. So let's say Amma gives you a very deep teaching, and by the time she's finished teaching you, you're like, wait a second, that just blew my mind. And then she gives you another little epilogue to that. Okay, this is how you're going to realize that. This is how you're going to make it your own, and you're really going to absorb it. That would give us some confidence that we might be able to actually realize that. But if she just ends with the teaching and doesn't tell us how to, absorb it, we might be lost or really afraid. So that's why it doesn't end with those teachings. There's like an epilogue that is needed to help us build up our confidence and see how we're going to actually implement this in our lives. So this chapter, 15th chapter, begins with this description of samsara, the mundane existence of birth, death, endlessly in a cycle. So that is the first 3 verses. And samsara, the never-ending cycle of birth and death, is compared to a huge tree. What kind of tree is it? Well, if you know Indian trees, you might know what the Bodhi tree is. Bodhi tree. Krishna says in, I think it was chapter 10, verse 26, of all the trees, I am the Bodhi tree, which is also known as people tree, and it is Ficus religiosa and botany. We're growing some of them here, that's why I know. They won't survive the winter, they have to come inside. So this tree is of immeasurable size, and this is how Jnanadev describes it in his introduction. The Lord explains how worldly existence is transitory by giving it in the form of a tree. Usually, if one were to pull out a tree and replant it upside down, it would wither away, but not this one. With the aid of this simile, the the Lord has skillfully swept clean the cycle of mundane existence. This chapter is intended to prove the nothingness of worldly existence and to establish in oneself the truth of the statement, I am myself, Supreme Brahman. So, like we said, it's connecting the dots, trying to help us understand that, yes, I am one with the Supreme Being. Now, I will emphatically lay bare the secret of the sacred Gita. Do listen. O Arjuna, it is the semblance of the universe that obstructs the way leading to the abode of the Supreme Self. This giant tree is not like other trees that have their roots at the base and the branches upwards. Thus, it cannot be controlled by the normal way of cutting it at the base. This tree cannot be easily felled. O Arjuna, it is such a novel tale to narrate all that is extraordinary about this tree. The growth of this tree is all directed downwards, just as the sun's rays spread out downwards, though it is at an immeasurable height. The growth of this tree is downwards in a very curious way. Every nook and cranny of the universe is stuffed with this tree, like the night becomes full of darkness after sunset. The tree bears neither any fruit that could be tasted, nor any flower that could be smelled. What exists is this tree, by itself, all alone. Such an immense world tree with its upward growing roots has come into existence. What is its top? What are the marks of the base? How and why is it down spreading? And how are its branches? What are the roots at the base? What and how are the branches in the upper region? And why is it called Ashwata? All of these queries will be answered by that self-knowing God, Lord Krishna. So, it's pretty exciting that this is what actually we're going to be learning in this chapter. But interestingly, Krishna gave these additional teachings without Arjuna even asking. Why? Shankaracharya gives this commentary. It goes without saying that those who fully know the reality of the self attain moksha. Therefore, the Lord, though unasked by Arjuna, spoke the verses of this chapter, seeking to set forth the truth about himself. In other words, Krishna is trying to help Arjuna see Krishna correctly as the Supreme Being. So this is what he's going to do. He's going to give him a teaching that will help him to do so. In the first place, to arouse detachment. He describes the real nature of the world through the metaphor of a tree. Because only one detached from the world is capable of grasping the truth about the Lord, none else. Oh no, did he have to, say nobody else? It means I don't have any chance? It's kind of discouraging, but he's also giving the antidote at the same time, the knowledge. So Jnanadev seems to concur in his introduction as well. He says, there is no doubt that the mind must be very pure to enable knowledge to get deeply impressed in it. The Lord has, after careful consideration, laid down as an established truth that knowledge cannot be firmly impressed unless there is vairagya, which is detachment. We could call it non-attachment, we could call it dispassion. We have many simpler words or less offensive words, but it boils down to detachment and absence of attachment. Lord Hari has further thought out how the mind can get vairagya. Should one come to know that poison has been mixed with the food, he walks away, pushing aside the plate. In the same way, once it is firmly impressed on the mind that worldly existence is only transitory, vairagya will closely follow you, even though pushed away. So this is such a beautiful point, because I think a lot of us understand what it feels like to have a flash of detachment, a flash of non-attachment, of renunciation, and doing some sadhana, and then maybe not so much that way. And somehow in our mind we have pushed away the detachment or the non-attachment, vairagya, and it'll come back to us if it is firmly impressed that worldly existence is only temporary. So, the challenge for Krishna is to impress on not just Arjuna, but our minds that point that this world is temporary, nothing lasts. Just like Amma says, even the next breath is not in our own hands. So it's going to be a teaching that helps us realize that. So, in a moment I'm going to show you some slides to show you what kind of tree this is. If you're from India, you know, most likely. And but for those of us who are not so familiar, you're going to need to see these photos. The Ashwata tree, also known as the Bodhi tree or the people tree, is so vast that it serves as a really apt metaphor for the vastness of samsara, which is immeasurable. Now I'm going to show you. We won't have me on the screen for a few minutes, so I can show you this. Now see. In maybe the person doing the slides can, they can't show their yeah, you can. Excellent, wonderful. Can you see that cursor? This is one person. Actually, that whole circle is not a person. In that middle of that circle is a tiny person sitting there at the base of the tree. Look at how big the tree is. Okay, so in terms of immenseness, we've satisfied the requisites. Okay, next slide. Let's have it a little bit bigger. Just so you can identify it as a tree, it has these heart-shaped leaves, which are very enchanting. And actually, it's the same tree that Lord Buddha is said to have attained nirvana. All right, next. Yeah. See how the roots are going from above a little bit. You're gonna see a little bit more on the next slide, but you can see the roots in detail growing downwards, but they're going from above, right? Okay, next. Next. You missed the button. There we go. Now, this is an even better one. Look at that. The roots are going down, huge roots. And this is how the tree becomes even more vast than it was in the first picture we showed. This is the very same one, very same genus and species of the tree, Ficus religiosa. If you live in a tropical climate, and if you know anything about these trees, people are always afraid to have them near their house because they're going to take over. They're so powerful. And but for us, as a metaphor, it is so perfect, and we'll find out as we go deeper in the chapter. I think this might be one more picture. That's it, yeah, okay. This was the penultimate one, yeah. All right, so you got the idea. So the root of this tree of samsara, which is Brahman, is actually invisible because Brahman doesn't have any attributes and we cannot see it. So the idea is that later on I'll find a graphic that somebody has actually prepared to show what this tree, this world tree, would look like. In fact, a lot of indigenous cultures have that world tree metaphor in their philosophy, in their cosmology, etc. But Brahman is invisible, so obviously the roots, being Brahman, are invisible. You may have read Tattva Bodha, where the explanation of creation takes place, and it says that it is impossible to explain how duality came. So that transition from oneness to duality can never be explained, so that is just invisible. It cannot be understood by intellect. So this metaphor of the Ashwata tree or the Bodhi tree is actually borrowed from the Upanishads. And similar references can also be found elsewhere in the Mahabharata and the Puranas. So I'll share the structure of this chapter. It has 4 parts that I could identify at least. The first three verses are Lord Krishna explaining samsara, the metaphor that he's providing actually. And it's only up to the first half of verse 3. And from the second half of verse 3 through verse 5, he explains or he offers some solutions for samsara, which we'll be happy to hear about. And in part 3, which is the main teaching, and that's verse 6 through 18, he talks about Brahma Jiva Aikyam, the oneness of Brahman with the individual soul, which is goes from verse 6 to 11. And then from verse 12 to 15, these are subcategories of part 3 rather. Then he says Brahman Jagat Aikyam. In other words, he talks about the oneness between Brahman and the world. That's 12 through 15. And from 16 to 18, there is a topic which we could probably call Sarvatma Bhava. It means that feeling of seeing the Atman everywhere. So when you realize that the individual is Brahman and you see that the world is Brahman, you realize that there's only Brahman. So we could say Sarva Brahma Drishti, or we can say Samatva Sarvatma Bhava. Like Amada's Devi Bhava, our goal is to attain Sarvatma Bhava, which is seeing the Atma everywhere. The fourth part of this chapter is the last 2 verses, 19 and 20, which is what is called Palastuti. Commonly the gurus or scriptures will conclude the teaching with a praise for the greatness of the teaching, and also they explain the benefits that it gives. So after describing samsara in those first 2.5 verses, Krishna is going to offer us some solutions, or we could say cures, for the disease of samsara. It is just a disease. It's also regarded, it's also called bhavaroga, which is the disease of becoming, of existence in this world. Because existence, if it were simply being, it would be okay, but existence has a beginning and an end for us as individuals. So that feeling that you're born and you die, that is a disease that can be cured with the right medicine, and that's what Krishna is going to share. And those solutions and cures, to be a little more specific, involve 4 steps. The first one is detachment. So for those of you who don't like that word, you're just going to have to get used to it. Vairagya is inescapable if you want spiritual growth. And that vairagya, or that detachment, is in the form of relinquishing emotional involvement in samsara. It doesn't mean that you go hide in a cave and say, no, I can't hear you, I can't see you, no. Not like that. You continue your life, but you try to watch it, become more of a witness, and not get too emotionally involved. Especially in today's world. Lockdown, no lockdown. Lockdown, mask, no mask. Here in Illinois, it's the same thing. So, everybody's frustrated that COVID, we have to wear masks again and everything. But that's because we were enjoying the maskless state too much. No, that's why we feel upset when we have to wear masks again. So that shows that we are very emotionally involved in something simple as that. So the second step is bhakti. We can call that like love for God or surrender to God. The third step is to cultivate values. These are the same things we said earlier. These methods that Krishna has been guiding us in throughout the Gita. So that third step is values, things that we can apply in daily life. Like I said, mostly the qualities in chapter 13, which is a very long list and enough of a challenge, so I think you can start there. And once you master all of those, then probably you'll be God realized anyhow, so nothing to worry about. And the fourth step is going to be Atma Vichara, or what we call in English self-inquiry, contemplation of the Atman, Brahman, etc. These are going to be the key words that come up in this section, like non-attachment, detachment, vairagya, seeking refuge, which is a bhakti concept, having freedom from pride and delusion, etc., and having that leksha bodha, or the focus on the goal to contemplate on the Atman. So all of this is perfectly in line with Amma's teachings. So I'd like to share a quote from Amma. Once a brahmachari shared his frustration, saying, "Amma, there's no steadiness in the mind, and I am not getting proper concentration." I think all of us would like to complain to Amma with that in that way. Amma immediately replied, "Son, that is due to a lack of vairagya, to a lack of detachment. A strong and determined will is necessary to progress spiritually. Without this, you should at least have pure love and devotion towards your guru." So she started with detachment, and then immediately, if you can't do that, then you have to focus on love for the guru, bhakti. So she's taking the same exact route as Lord Krishna. Attachment to the guru will withdraw the mind from all worldly thoughts and objects. It will help to fix the thoughts on the guru, and then steadfastness of life will slowly increase. Okay. In chapter 15, verse 6, the outcome and benefit of this are explained. He says, "Neither the sun, nor the moon, nor even fire can illumine that supreme state, my abode, going where they never return." In other words, they attain Brahman and become free from samsara. Now, remember, if we attain moksha and become free from samsara, is that temporary or is that permanent? Can you come back into samsara again? Well, Krishna said, "from which they never return." So if anybody ever tells you that, oh, somebody was realized, they went back and now they're not realized anymore, no, that is just wrong understanding. I even remember, I might have shared it before, I remember somebody in Japan once came up to me and said, "I heard from so-and-so that you were realized in your past life, but then you forgot that you were realized, so now you took birth with Amma and she's helping you become realized again." And I was like, what? I think you're pretty confused. This is the kind of things that people will say. Don't fall for it. It's if you're either liberated or not. There's no unmoksha that exists. So from verse 7, Krishna discusses the nature of Brahman again. He's discussed it earlier in the Gita. And it's because of sections like this that the Gita is considered to be on the level with the Upanishads. First, he demystifies Brahman, showing how it is available in every being as their being. It's not like a special thing inside of me. It's in my heart, so I got to find it there. No, it is your own being. That is Brahman. So like he says in verse 7, "A portion of myself, the external Jivatma, having become a living soul in the world, draws to itself the five senses and mind, which rest in Prakriti." So a portion of myself, that means that Supreme Being, Brahman, Atman, whatever you want to call it, is a portion, so to speak, in us, because it is reflected in our subtle body. So that reflection of the Atman in us, in our subtle body, is what he's talking about as a portion of himself. So being a portion of Amma, well, that's as good as being Amma. We just don't realize that. So our challenge is to realize that what has always been true. Then up to verse 11, Krishna will point out that the proof of Brahman is self-evident, because the inert physical and subtle bodies cannot function without sentience. And that sentience is consciousness. And that sentience is not of this changing world. Consciousness is always there, even when this whole universe is dissolved at the end. And between then and until the next creation, consciousness is still there. It's the only thing that remains. So it is not part of this changing world. It reflects itself in our subtle body. That's the only thing it does. And any being's subtle body. The problem is understanding that as a fact requires a very special ability. And that ability Krishna refers to in verse 10. The ignorant do not know the self, but those who have the eye of wisdom realize it. So the eye of wisdom, it sounds like a mystical concept, and we compare it with the third eye and so on. It's true. But what it really means is that they see without the filter of the ego. And with the ego becomes all of the negative side effects. The sense that I am doing this, this is mine, etc. Once that creeps into the mind, it's going to be impossible for us to see everything as God, because we're laying claim to so many things in the world, especially with our desires. So they, like a realized being, doesn't see anything as separate from themselves, but we see everything as separate from ourselves. So our vision is opposite, the polar opposite of theirs. So this is why we can say that these 5 verses that I just mentioned, they were going backwards. Those 5, I'm just to find exactly which 5 they are. The main teaching, 6 to 11. That's what it was. So that's why these verses are considered to be on the level of the Upanishads. Because they depict the oneness of the individual soul with the Supreme Soul. So then in verses 12 through 15, Krishna makes it known that Brahman exists not only in the form of the jiva, of the individual soul, but also in the form of the jagat, this world. And this concept is generally called sarvatma bhavaha. That's what I talked about a little while ago. So if you can see if you can find that consciousness not only in yourself and recognize that as God, then the only thing left is to see that same pure consciousness in all beings. And I say only, but it's not a small step. It is a person realizing that consciousness within themselves is a very high attainment, and it's just a very short distance from there to seeing that in all beings. So when we see that same Atma everywhere, Sarvatma Bhava, then we can say, I am Brahman and everything is Brahman. Brahman is everywhere. There's nothing but Brahman. That would be the experience for one who realizes that truth. Calling oneself Brahman is certainly easy for an intellectual. The problem is experiencing it, like I was saying before. So once a reporter came to Amma and asked her a question. And you may have thought this yourself, or somebody may have asked you this question also. So we should really remember what Amma said. The reporter asked, don't the scriptures say that everything is within us? Then what is the need for all this sadhana? Maybe he's right. Maybe we shouldn't be doing any sadhana. Is it just a big waste of time? Amma's just fooling us, or what? Well, this guy had no idea what was coming, because that's a very important point for Amma. So she immediately basically clarified his doubts, we could say. Although everything is within us, it is useless if we don't actually experience it. For that, sadhana is absolutely necessary. The rishis who gave us the great dictums such as I am Brahman or thou art that, they had reached that plane of experience. They viewed all living creatures as being equal. They loved and served all beings without distinction. The point is that, are you doing that? Obviously not. In their eyes, nothing in the universe was separate from themselves. While they had the qualities of God, Ishvara, we have the qualities of a fly, Icha. Amma loves this comparison. Ishvara is God, and Icha is fly. So you think you're Ishvara, but you're actually Icha. A fly lives in dirt and excreta. Similarly, our minds see only others' mistakes and defects. This has to change. We have to be able to see the good in everything. Until we realize the truth through sadhana and contemplation, there's no sense in saying that everything is already within us. People who have studied the scriptures in Vedanta for 50 years come here. Even they say they have no peace of mind. We can't get light by hanging a picture of a lamp on the wall. If we need to see something, we have to turn the real light on. Learning from books and giving speeches is not enough. To experience the truth, one has to do sadhana and discover the real I. For this, a guru's help is essential. So, case in point, now that Amma is having these live streams every day, and here in Chicago it starts at 6:30 and doesn't end really, today it was like 10:30 or so when it ended. So the point is that, my question is that we're sitting still for 4 hours focused on this. If it weren't for Amma, would we be doing that every morning? I don't think so. A handful of people, maybe very sincere seekers, maybe. I wasn't doing 4 hours of things like that before Amma started. So that love we have for her and all the effort that she's making to keep us focused, that is what is helping us to stay focused and to learn and train our mind to achieve one-pointedness. All of this is through the sadhana that she's dragging us through while we're kicking and screaming at the same time. So in Bhagavad Gita, the climax of that teaching I am Brahman, comes in verse 15, where Krishna says, I am seated in the hearts of all. I am verily that which is worth knowing by all the Vedas. I am indeed the source of the Vedanta and the knower of the Veda I am. In other words, he's saying that he is the knower, the known, and the means of knowing, all in one. So, in the language of chapter 13, it is, he is the kshatrajna, he is the kshetra, and he is the means of knowing as well. He's everything. In other words, Brahman is everything. There's nothing other than Brahman. With this, Krishna establishes the oneness of the individual, the world, and God. All is one, there is nothing else, there's no duality. The last and most important topic comes in verses 16 through 18. And here, instead of using duality as the method of explanation, and previously he talks about the one who's eating and that which is eaten and all, different dualistic metaphors to help us understand. Here he uses that one term, Purusha. Purusha, and he talks about it in different states, so to speak. There's Kshara Purusha, Akshara Purusha, and Uttama Purusha. So Purusha, as you know, we encountered it as sort of the Paramatman, Parabrahman, or we, in the language of the 8th chapter, I think it was Para Prakriti. When you add a prefix to it, Kshara Purusha, it becomes the world. Kshara just means it changes, it goes away. So the world or Jagat is Kshara Purusha. Then Akshara Purusha is, this also came, I think, in the eighth chapter. Akshara Purusha means the indestructible Purusha, but even that doesn't refer to the highest being. It refers to Maya. Maya is, on the relative plane, Maya is indestructible because it never goes away. It's in a seed form during the pralayam, and then when the creation starts again, then the Maya manifests itself, but the seed form is always there also. So it is, in that sense, it is indestructible, it's permanent, but not really permanent, because when you realize God, there's no more Maya. And that state of God realization is represented by Uttama Purusha, and that is Brahman. So, Maya is matter. Obviously, the world is matter, as we learned in chapter 14. The Para Prakriti or the Uttama Purusha is above them. That's why it's called the superior, because it's beyond both the world and Maya. And it also has another name, which is, instead of saying Uttama Purusha, it's Purushottama. It's just changing the order of the words. So Purushottama is commonly considered to be Lord Vishnu. And we can understand it as a concept of Vishnu, but not Vishnu with form. It would be Nirgunam Brahman Vishnu. Vishnu beyond all attributes. And for that matter, it doesn't matter which deity it is at all, because when they're attribute-less, it could apply to any of the deities, or the gurus, or even ourselves. The last two verses, 19 and 20, are basically what we call palastuti, the benefit and glory of the teaching. And the benefit is going to be that we become free from samsara, which is moksha, the highest goal anybody could possibly hope for. And that means perfect peace. Everybody's searching for peace in their life, and they don't get it, like Amma said. But if you attain perfect and infinite peace, there's no higher goal than that. So that is the benefit. And the glory of this knowledge is that it is regarded as the greatest secret, the rarest of knowledge. So, in the conclusion of his introduction to this chapter, Jnanadev says, all this I will make clear in select and choice phraseology, so that you will be able to realize it fully. Hear you, O Blessed One. This is a befitting occasion for you. So listen attentively, creating ears to hear all over your body. At these words, dripping wet with affection for the hero amongst Yadavas, Arjuna became attention incarnate. So, I'll leave you with those words as attention incarnate, as projecting yourself on Arjuna, and we will find out what teachings are yet to come next week. I will try to answer the questions that came in between last week and today. Amma, and in all teachings we are told that we are not our body. Yet every day I have to spend a lot of time caring for this body. Yes, we all do, right? Shopping for food, cooking, giving it exercise, bathing it, housing it, working to feed, house, and clothe it, etc. What viewpoint can I take that will help me discern that I am not this body? How can I become detached from it while performing all these actions? Very good question. Something that all of us should eventually contemplate. Well, what comes to my mind is some of the typical metaphors that come up in the scriptures and Amma's examples as well. A very common metaphor used is a vehicle. back in the Bhagavad Gita times, they were chariots. That's all they had. Actually, it'd be nice to see some chariots around these days for some culture. All we have is cars, unfortunately. But it was a very good metaphor, because you had someone steering it, and you had a passenger, and you had the reins, and you had the horses, etc. So there's a very elaborate metaphor for how the chariot is can be compared to the individual. But the idea is that the chariot itself is the body, without going into the entire metaphor, which is not necessarily relevant to this question. So for us, it's easy to think of it as a car, because most people have a car, and this person said that they're going to buy things, so I'm assuming they're going in a car. So the car is the body, and what do cars need? Well, if you're, good at maintaining your car, if you have that awareness, which you should have if you want your car to last for a long time, you have to, it needs proper and regular maintenance. So you need lube jobs, you need new filters, you got to change your filters, you got to change your tires at the right time, and you have to have like a detailed checkup every so many miles, 15,000, 20,000 miles, whatever it is. And only then will the car last and run well for a long time. So some of us do that, and when we don't do it, we may find that the body fights back. It says, look, you haven't been showing me much attention. I'm going to make your life really miserable. I'm going to hurt here, and I'm going to hurt there. I'm not going to let you do this and that. It's, I'm just going to make your life very painful. So then we're like, okay, I hear the message. I'm going to take care of the body, because it's a vehicle even for the spiritual path. All the things Amma is teaching us and asking us to do, how can you do it if your body is in horrible condition? So, just like that although you're taking care of your car, the car is not you. We should have that same feeling about the body. I have to maintain it. It's a crybaby. It's nagging me all the time. It's always complaining. Fine, I'm stuck. I can't divorce my body, not yet. So, I'm stuck with it. So I'll just deal with it, but I'm not going to identify with it. At least emotionally, we can try to keep saying that. And I like the fact that this person says it, talking to the body as like calling it it. That's good. So constantly, this body is that, this body is that. If you look at it as objectively, it'll help you to detach from it and not become a slave to all of its cravings. Other examples that Amma uses is, she'll say things like going on a picnic, because worldly life, including the body, are part of that picnic that we have here in this world. And we may go somewhere and spread a nice picnic blanket on the grass, and then sit there and open up our basket full of food and have a nice tasty picnic and relax and look up at the stars and just really enjoy everything. But she says that we never forget where our real home is. At the end of the picnic, you don't say, oh wait, where do I live? Is this where I live, or do I live somewhere else? If you have your wits about you, you will remember that you live somewhere else. That's your real home. So she says, while we're living in this world, we should remember that this is not our true abode. This body, especially, is not my true abode. So I need to return to my original abode, which is God or Brahman. Same thing about the exam bell example that she gives. Life is like an exam hall. Living in an exam hall, when the bell rings that says this is the end of the exam period, we cannot barter with the professor like, oh, I need a few more minutes. When the buzzer goes, that's it. We're done. So this life has a limited duration, and this body, meaning that the body has a limited duration, and we have to remember that all the time, that anytime it can go. We don't know exactly when the bell is going to ring, and we have to vacate this body. She also gives the example of someone who's renting a house. If you don't pay your dues, or when it's time to leave that, when your lease expires, then you will be forcibly removed from there if you don't vacate. Even if you say, I want a few more days, you won't get it because legally speaking, your time there is up. Similarly, with the body, when our time is up, we will have to leave. Even if we go kicking and screaming, say, I want one more day on earth. You won't even get one more second on earth. So remembering all these truths, we should cultivate some detachment from the body and treat it as a kind of, a forced companion on the spiritual path. But if you take care of the body will take care of you. Just don't pamper it, that's all. Another person asked for the live stream. So like I've been talking about it. I'd love to give it to you, but we need your email address. So please send one more message with your email address and your name and your WhatsApp number. We need all that information to register you. Next question is, what does the title of Bhagavad Gita chapter 18 mean, which is Moksha Sannyasa? Is it renouncing worldly desires in order to attain moksha, or is the sadhak operating purely with devotion as God's instrument by renouncing the desire for moksha as well? As one who does this will be liberated anyway? Yes, it's kind of both, you could say. In chapter 18, Krishna talks about 3 different types of sannyasa. We'll get there, so we won't talk about it a whole lot. And he says that sattvic sannyasa is the best. It's just you follow your own dharma. You have to understand what your dharma is in the first place. And you have to follow universal dharma like ahimsa and truthfulness, etc. But you have to do all these things while renouncing the attachment and concern for the fruit of our actions in this world. So that is the challenge. That's the most difficult thing, is to do a lot of things that we have to do, like the person mentioned in taking care of her body or his body, but without attachment. And this chapter is called Moksha Sannyasa Yoga because even though a lot of different topics are there, Arjuna's question started with sannyasa, that topic. So we can say that's one reason why. We can also say that there was a jnana sannyasa yoga that came earlier in the Gita. So maybe we have to distinguish the two. Don't give too much importance to the titles of the chapters because originally they didn't have any titles. Those came up later. So it also, in some way, we could say that it's, you don't have that focus or this super desire to get moksha. You're doing what your guru tells you. And if Amma says, clean the toilets, you just do that. And you don't worry about moksha at that time. Whatever the guru says. At this phase in our spiritual evolution, thinking about moksha is not going to help us because it's too far away. Amma says it can happen now, but only if you're prepared. So that means we have to cultivate a lot of detachment, vairagya, before we qualify for that. Another question came up. I have chosen bhajans as a primary means for my sadhana. It means devotional singing. This is to manage some stress-related health condition. Although I'm seeing good results in health and work productivity fronts, I'm not doing some sadhanas in the way they are recommended. Amma mentioned that the great benefits of mantra chanting, etc. I'm chanting my mantra only for 30 minutes or so. That's more than some people, as I'm doing bhajans most of the time. Basically, the person is wondering, is this okay? And what we can say is that yes, if it's helping you, yes, you can do that for now. You're chanting your mantra 30 minutes per day, so you're definitely meeting that guideline that Amma suggests for everybody who receives a mantra. Just at the same time, don't allow your mind to harden into that routine, the one you have now. Because a time may change, and a time will come when you have to change your sadhana and shift to something else that is more important at that time. So in order to not struggle with that shift, it's good to just keep in mind that I'm doing this now, eventually I may have to move on to another sadhana. In theory, anything dharmic can potentially become a sadhana, but that doesn't mean we should cement our sadhana routine in that forever. So you're doing bhajans now, fine, but just remember that it may change and you don't know when that will happen, and when it changes, you can just let go. Another question about bhakti. I have gone through the life stories of some realized masters who have shown the disciples and others the highest level of devotion, which we call para bhakti. Some people around them initially thought the avatars were insane, unable to understand the devotion from their dimension. In the field of karma yoga, though, I have heard only few names who have attained liberation, like King Janaka. The only one that anybody ever quotes is King Janaka. Someone who has chosen karma yoga as their sadhana as a householder, do they just need to meet the minimal baseline for self-realization requirement? Is it hard for householders in the path of karma yoga to achieve liberation? Then a lifetime renunciate in the ashram, etc. It's a comparison of the two. So I'm glad this question came. I wouldn't call it a good question because it has some wrong assumptions, but at the same time, it's a opportune question. To say very clearly, there is no attainment of moksha only through karma, only through karma yoga. Just know that you cannot just do karma yoga the whole time and reach God and oneness with God, realization. Nowhere in any scripture does it say that that is possible. And even Amma, though she tells us to do a lot of karma yoga, she will never say that just by doing karma yoga you can attain God. Never. If you look at karma yoga from the non-dual standpoint, we could possibly phrase it in such a way that we can describe a form of karma yoga where there's no duality, but then it's not really karma yoga anymore, is it? Karma yoga, as we know it, it is a purificatory sadhana that helps us reduce our desires. And like Amma said earlier in today's class, that the inability to concentrate, she just says all the things that the scriptures say without having ever studied them. She said, lack of detachment is the reason why you cannot concentrate. So how do you get rid of those, she says, so many desires, so many attachments. How do you get rid of those desires and attachments so that you can concentrate? There has to be some method for that. That's what karma yoga is. That's what it is meant for. So you're doing something that you don't benefit from, or you only minimally benefit from. You cook for 100 people. Okay, I'm 1 out of 100. That's better than, only, keeping everything for yourself. There was the cooking question before. I won't repeat that. So we're earning money. Instead of using all of it for ourselves, we're donating some to needy people. So this shows that we're relinquishing some of our attachment. In the ashrams, there's so much seva available, especially Amrita Puri, where if you want to work from dawn till dusk, you can do it non-stop. It's a perfect place to destroy all your vasanas and attachments. And because Amma's there, all the more so. So that is what karma yoga is for. And once that progresses to a certain point, we will tangibly notice that we have better concentration. We can focus not only in meditation, but we can have better shraddha, better awareness in all the things that we do. Doesn't happen overnight. But it is the fruits or the prasad of karma yoga. And there'll be an overlap where you're still doing a lot of karma yoga, but you're finding yourself able to meditate more, do more japa, You can sit in front of your altar longer, maybe chanting some scriptures or visualizing Amma or doing your own little puja or singing bhajans. All of these things, the ability to sit for a long time and do these things, focus on them, is the fruit of karma yoga. And once we attain that one-pointedness of mind, which is the intention of the prasad that we get from bhakti yoga and upasana, which is all those things I said, like mantra japa and bhajans, etc. The fruit of that is our ability to dive deep in the philosophical teachings of oneness with God, jnana yoga. But you can look at karma yoga as leading all the way up to that. You could call it that, I suppose. Normally, that's not the meaning that we use. Amma is doing karma yoga. No, we wouldn't say that Amma is doing karma yoga. We would say she's teaching us how to do karma yoga, but what she doesn't do anything because there's no doer in her. And then she teaches us bhakti yoga, but really with her, there's no bhakti going on because there's no one else to worship than her own self. So yeah, you could say it's bhakti yoga, but really this is jnana. It's knowledge of oneness with God. So it's not really proper to say that karma yoga goes all the way to the final goal, and same thing with with bhakti. But at their highest levels, in a way, we could refer to them like that. There's one more question, and I think I'll save that for next week. So whoever asked that question, stay tuned. And now we will chant a couple of mantras. We are ending a little bit early, and we will meditate till about 8:30, and then after that we will conclude with one more final mantra. So, this will be the formal conclusion of the class itself. After this, if you have time, you can join us for a short meditation. Om Asato ma sadgamaya Tamaso ma jyotirgamaya Mrityorma amritam gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. Om Amriteshwari Namaha. Close your eyes. Check your posture. Try to keep your back and neck relatively straight. And take a few long, deep breaths. With each long, deep breath, feel the mind going deeper and the thoughts slowing down further and further. Try to feel Amma's subtle presence all around you. Feel as though she's holding you in her universal arms, pulling you close to her. Feel her shining within you. Let us slow down the mind even more by focusing our attention on the rhythmic flow of the breathing process. Be fully conscious of each and every inhalation and exhalation. As you focus your awareness on the breathing process, the mind becomes more and more subtle. And you can sense the subtle life force that is brought in and out of the body through the vehicle of the breath. Feel that prana shakti, that life force flowing in with each breath, and again back out with each exhalation. With each inhalation and exhalation, feel that prana shakti refreshing and revitalizing the entire body. Feel it on the subtle level as well, as an energy pervading the entire body. with each breath. Try to remember that that prana shakti, that life force, is shared by all living beings. There is only one prana shakti sustaining all beings on the physical and subtle levels. It is all pervasive. It is that life force we are witnessing in each and every breath. The prana shakti life force being all pervasive. What can witness that? Only pure consciousness, which is also all pervasive, can witness the prana shakti. So by witnessing it, we are also recognizing that that consciousness is also shared by all beings. It is all pervasive, and that is our true self. That is the Purushottama. Try to retain that feeling as long as possible, even as we chant the final closing prayer. Take a deep breath. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnaad Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate Om Shanti Shanti, Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. One more long deep breath. And as you exhale, you can slowly open your eyes. Om Amriteshwari Namaha. We will be having another Gita class next week. And that week, the bhajans will be coming from DC. And after that, we will have bhajans on the 21st from here. And we will actually, you might have seen the little thumbnail on the screen. We're having a Krishna Jayanti celebration on the 29th of this month. Hope to see you for all those. Om Namah Shivaya.